Well, I'm glad you all are here. It's really early in the morning, but that's cool. It's earlier for me because I'm from California, so I don't feel too sorry for you. But it is early, so we're just kind of cruise through this and try to keep you awake and have a little fun while we're doing this. So, give you a little background about myself. I am not an academic. I love and appreciate those who have gone through that process. There are a few things that I respect more than folks who have done the kind of work that it takes to get, especially your PhDs, those who do things like run marathons, those kinds of things. I just do not have that in me, and I applaud anybody who does that. I'm a proud dropout of 2 Doctor of Ministry programs. Those schools still like to claim me as a past student. I'm like, okay. But what I do bring to the conversation is graduated from seminary in 1995 and have been pastoring since then. This church up here right now is called Covenant Presbyterian Church, was in San Francisco. My first call redevelopment congregation. This church is the church plant that I did in San Francisco as well. A church called Mission Bay Community Church. Our annual reminder was more 20s than 30s, more 30s than 40s. And if you were 50, you could still come, but you were going to be old there. So, which was fine. And then this is a church I recently served a few years ago, Valley Presbyterian Church in Portola Valley. You can't quite see it in the end there, but that's a redwood grove on a full window at the front of the sanctuary. They do a few weddings there, if you could imagine. And first time I preached there, I was like, how are you paying attention to anything that is being said from the pulpit? Because that thing is amazing. I like to tell them that the view is beautiful and the people are okay too. That was my... And now I'm serving this congregation in Daly City, right outside of San Francisco, part-time as their transitional pastor. It's an amazing working class, kind of blue collar, reminds me of my home church community. I've served a lot of different congregations in my time, ranging from large 500, 600 member churches, and kind of doing more head of staffy kinds of things, to church planting, to doing small church. And what I've discovered is that they all have one thing in common. They're all looking for the great unicorn. What's the unicorn we're all looking for?
The great.
Young people. Right? Every conversation I go to, how do we get the young people into the church? You gotta, and I'm not one of those that's like all smug about that conversation. I think it's a genuine yearning and need, and people are really wondering what that is about. Like I don't immediately kind of go at folks and say, that's not the right question and all. I just feel like, yes, our churches in our denomination, we're small, we're trying to figure out what's next. These small churches that are just filled with lovely people like the folk like Lucille, who I talked about, who love the church and are just trying to figure it out. This is what they're looking for. How do we get, in some ways, our kids to come back? I know that's sitting back there, but also they're seeing these urban environments changing and shifting, and folks aren't coming to church. But you're also getting these large churches that I've pastored who are doing the same thing. They're trying to figure out, what does this look like? How are we going to get these young folks into this church? We're intellectual, well-off, progressive. Why aren't they coming? The church plant I did, that was all we were about, was how do we get this particular part of San Francisco to come into the church, to figure out what it means to be a person of faith in a particular environment at that time. And so I think it's a valid and valuable question to begin to think about. And what I want to do today is to kind of start up high, and then we're going to land on some ways to think about in terms of giving and stewardship. But this is what it's going to look like and feel like over the next 15 minutes, okay? So just bear with me. I do not apologize for you feeling like we're going so fast that you can't keep up. That slide share, this will be at the end of the slides as well. I upload these slides. I'll do that tonight. You can look at all these all again. My slides are not very wordy, so it's up to you to remember what I said, but you'll see the images, and hopefully that'll jar some stuff. So don't worry. All right, here we go. We're going to do a big picture. Your technological my contribution today. If you ever need images, free images, Pexels.com is the place to go. If you're a amateur photographer and you think you have some good pictures you can put up there, you can share. It's kind of an open source kind of setting. So all the images I get, I either took them or they come from Pexels. All right, we're also going to land, so don't worry, I'll give you some particular things. Whenever people came at me when I did a church plant, because I was very serious about if folks came to our church and you did not have a heart for 20 and 30-year-olds in San Francisco, this was probably not going to be the right place for you. I would say if you want intergenerational, we have tons of those in San Francisco. If you want high church, Calvary Presbyterian Church is great out in Pacific Heights. If you want small, urban, whatever, we were just very focused about what we were doing and why we were doing and how we would do that. So I always look to Scripture and begin to think about, well, where is it that begins to say, here's what we can do and what's allowed and not? I love this passage when Paul says, to those outside the law, to the Jew, to the, all those pieces that some folks would say, well, but you're pretending to be something you're not. I'm like, no, you're just figuring out how to be you in the midst of a context, and you do have boundaries. I love when people talk to me about stuff and like, well, what's the line? Like, you don't have any lines. I'm like, we all have lines. Ours are just different, and we have to figure out what they are. It's not like and then people get to know us, and then they figure out, yeah, we're probably just as traditional as most places. But this is the passage that I lean on a lot. All right, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because this is important. I'm a child of the 80s. So this picture here is in 1987, the year I graduated from high school. I'm trying to look tough. I do not like the Detroit Tigers, but I went with my outfit. So I used to cruise in Sacramento, California, down Freeport Boulevard. We had a black, lowered, tinted Oldsmobile Cutlass with speakers so big in the back seat that you couldn't fit anybody back there. And when the bass hit, the whole car rumbled. That was me. Total poser. That was not really my world, but me and Kevin Taketa standing next to me. Now, this is also us trying to look tough, but if you see that right there, that's a printer. So if you back out of this picture, we're standing in the computer lab of our high school. So I have to really crop that picture down to try to get it so it looks like but we're not tough at all. My favorite part about this picture, I stay in touch with 4 of these guys. We lost Jason Verips, this guy on I don't want to push the right button, on the left there. Does anybody know Jason? Oh, damn, I'm going to find him eventually. So, but I haven't heard from him in years, but the 4 of us get together all the time. And I always tell Eric that I show this picture to thousands of people every year that he's wearing a mesh half shirt. And he's like, great, thanks, man. All right, I'm a pastor's kid, so I have a deep history in the Presbyterian Church. I was born into it in Stockton, California. That's my grandfather in the middle there. His name was Esteban de los Reyes when he came to the United States. Esteban de los Reyes is the best name ever. But when they came to the United States, they changed it, and now it was Steve Reyes, because they didn't want to have a lot of crazy language in there. But he was a founding elder of Trinity Presbyterian Church in Stockton, California. Trinity was formed out of the migrant farm workers' strikes. They didn't put Filipino in its name because in somewhere they knew that part of Stockton, the 8th Street exit in Stockton, California, was where most people in their transition to the United States were going to come. So over the years, that area has changed quite a bit. It's a tough part of Stockton. If you ever are a visitor to Stockton, they will probably tell you, do not get off at 8th Street. That's where my family lives. And that was kind of I grew up there and in Sacramento, California with my mother, who is a single mom, amazing woman. She is also a minister, Presbyterian pastor, though she went to seminary after I did. So she worked in the state legislature for many years, taught high school, and then felt a call to ministry. And so the year I graduated in 95, my mother started in the fall of that year of 95. So I'm a pastor's kid with all the glory and none of the baggage. I love it. It's wonderful. My mom just retired and is having a lovely time in retirement. And that's our oldest daughter, Evelyn, who I've mentioned before. All right. I have 3 daughters, Evelyn, Abigail, and Annalise. I'll talk about them in a minute. But so raising 3 daughters in San Francisco, women have surrounded me in my upbringing, and 3 daughters. Our dogs are also girls. I mean, it's just me. But what that's done is it's changed my entire way that I look at the world. We have daughters that are strong-willed, which intellectually we think is a good idea to have kids that are strong-willed and confident. Intellectually, right? There's that moment where like, that's dumb. Why would we want that? Because then they want to do stuff that you don't want them to do. But later on, you figure out that it actually is a good thing. So those are my daughters. And then I'm a pretty big kind of technology enthusiast. You know, in that computer lab picture, it was the first computer lab in Sacramento, California. I learned how to code when I was in high school. It was in that transition from typing to keyboarding. I don't know anything about what happens outside the screen in behind, but I love what we do with it. So a lot of the work I do is around how do we use technology well. I firmly believe that if we do not know how to do it well, then we're abdicating our responsibility to a generation of people to learn and help and nurture and guide. And too often we just kind of dismiss that. So that's some of the stuff that I am involved with. I share all of that with you because I think one of the most important things if you're trying to reach the unicorns in any way is to shift our mindset from a framework of assuming we know about this monolithic group called young adults. And I don't define it for you at all because that is a fool's game. Because if I say millennials are this, somebody's going to like, yeah, but you know what? It's actually 1990 when they're born. If I say this, it's going to, right? So that's the great beauty of a generation of people that we are trying to reach. It's also the most frustrating thing in the world. Because before, we would build denominations based on the idea that if I was a Presbyterian in Minnesota and I had my worship style and everything I liked, then I could trot on over to San Francisco and find a church that is exactly like that and feel just as at home. And that was what worked for us as a community and a culture. We would go from one place to another until we realized that not every single generational reality or experience wants the exact same style of something. And so as Presbyterians, we're having to decide, is being Presbyterian about a style or is it about a theology? Because if it's about a style, that's different, right? Then it's a uniform style. But if it's about a theology, then that theology can be expressed in a variety of ways. So the first challenge I want to make for you all is this: is when you think about young adults, and man, we're starting up here. I'll land about giving. When we think about young adults, we can't assume. These are the four things I'm going to talk about today: about assumptions, about observations, about translating, and then action. The first thing is about assuming. We can't assume. I'll tell you a little story. My wife and I come home one day. We walk into the kitchen. Our kids, Abby and Annie, were probably, must have been like kindergarten and second grade. We come in and we look on the table and there is this piece of paper. This is where youth conference leadership usually starts to freak out. They're like, Bruce, did you just put a picture of penis up there? I'm like, it's okay, we all know the word. So we get home and we see this, and my wife and I are like, okay, that's cool. Like, we're not freaking out. Kindergarten, second grade, like they're exploring, they're curious, something's going on. So my wife and I were like, oh good, now's the chance, right? So we huddle up. How are we going to talk this? We're going to call them out. And we plan and strategize about, okay, well, we're going to call them out. We're going to have this conversation. You ask these questions. I'll ask this question. And then we'll kind of go from there. And then we'll just this is going to be great because we're awesome parents. So we call them out. Hey, Abby, Annie, why don't you come out into the kitchen? And so we call them out and we sit down. And they're like, what's going on? I'm like, so, hey, how you doing? What were you doing today? Nothing. We'll chit-chat with your kindergarten and second grade. I'm like, so, hey, Ab, so we saw this piece of paper. So let's talk about this. And they're looking at us like, you're idiots. What are you doing? And we're like, so what was going on? And they said, oh, that was just, we were playing bank, and that was our label for the pennies drawer. We still have this piece of paper on our refrigerator. And whenever anybody comes to visit us for the first time, you can see them like look at because you look at people's refrigerators and you see them like done and they're like, And then they're like, do we ask about it? And of course, our family loves to create awkward space, and we just ignore it, like, yeah, I don't know. And we just let them sit there, and like, why does there a penis on there? Okay, it's Reese and Robin, they're great parents, right? We laugh about this still to this day. Because it was for us one of those moments that we so genuinely and earnestly, so this wasn't a negative reaction, there's an opportunity that we felt was there to have this great passionate discussion about something important in our children's lives, and we totally missed it. Because we didn't take the time to kind of step back from this and maybe look around, because there might have been other pieces of paper that looked like the word nickels and quarters. But no, we didn't do that. We saw penis and we're like, oh, we're going to talk about that, right? We do that with young adults all the time. We see social media and that's all we're going to talk about. It's like, oh, let's get the young people talk about whatever. So whatever it is, what I encourage us to be able to do is to step back and not make these huge, big assumptions based on one thing we might know or believe we know or see or observe, because that's probably coming from a lens of a 49-year-old or a 59-year-old or a 69-year-old, which our lenses are so different that when we see it, it's just not going to be the same. Really? Am I that? Oh, I am not. This is not good for you all. I got through 1 point. Okay, so, we're in trouble. So, the second thing I want to do is we need to make sure we observe things that are going on. This is my favorite GIF ever. This is what I want to do oftentimes with my children. I don't know. So here's the thing. We got to seek value in the niches in the world. The world is changing. We got to seek value in the different ways. If you think about beer, I'm not a beer person, but you know there used to be one and now there's like a million. That doesn't make the first one worse. Some of you may think that is true, but it doesn't make it worse, but it's just a lot of different things. The other piece is to remember that there are third and fourth and fifth and sixth spaces of community these days, and that it's not a value judgment necessarily based on the church. I think sometimes we like that, God, the church is an awful place, and so that's why people aren't coming. Well, sometimes it's actually there are other elements in which people are existing, and now we just overlap a lot more, right? Whether it's a coffee shop as a third space, or it's a sports program, or it's something like Girl Scouts, or whatever it is, people are finding community in a variety of places, and we have to honor that. We are in trouble here. All right, so technological variety. One of the things that we assume about young folks is about their technology. My daughters, I have a laboratory in my house. It's amazing for somebody who likes to talk about technology. Evelyn at 13, best birthday present we could give her was to get on Facebook. And she got on there, and all of her friends had lied about their age, and she was appalled that they did that, but they were all there already. Abby, when she turned 13, 4 years later, she's like, I have to get on Facebook. Right? And then Annie, who just turned 13 a couple of years ago, she's like, I am not getting on Facebook. Then we had to add her. One of the things about young adults and technology is that there is a variety of things going on out there now. I have friends, young adults, people who are totally checked off and are not involved at all, others that are. One of the things I would think is one of the worst things you could begin to say, if utter in any way, when you talk about anything young adult-y, is to immediately do the first thing is to talk about technology and social media. Please do not do that. It just smacks of condescension and of a lack of understanding the nuance of a community and a generation. All right. You have to translate and know yourself. One of the things that it's important to do, I have to skip over this story, but my preaching professor, one of the greatest things he ever taught me, J. Alfred Smith, was that you can only be who you are. You can't try to be someone else. In our first class, I remember J. Alfred Smith, amazing preacher, he said to us, how many of you want to preach like me? And we all raised our hand and well, of course we want to preach like you. And he said, you're not going to learn how to preach like me. You're going to learn how to preach like you. And we all looked at him and went, I already know how to do that, and that's not very good, so I'd rather learn how to preach like you. But then he made us preach off the cuff and just preach like us. And so one of the things you have to be able to do is to know what you can do, who your people are, and then translate in ways that make sense. I got to jump to the acting part. So let me tell you about this. You got to talk about the money. I pastored a young adult church. We were self-sufficient. People gave. This idea that young folks will not give to the church, if you do it in a particular way, yes. But if you are open and honest and talk about the ways in which the money is used, these are not only things that are good for the church, but are good for individuals. I preach on money all the time. I love preaching about money because it's an important part, and you got to figure out how to do that. I'll just tell you a quick little story. So my daughter is an actress, so this is her, the cutest little zombie you've ever seen. Two of them do some commercial stuff. This is what we do with them. Every time any of them gets paid, this is how they divide up their money. We agreed on this at the very beginning. And we talk about it with them, that when they get a job, it impacts the whole family. So their siblings get paid when they get paid. And so they're all happy for each other when any of them gets a job. Because they don't have to actually work. They're like, "Ooh, Abby got a job. Great. I get spending money," right? That's how, and we talk about it all the time. I will say one of the dangers about money is this. Sometimes our reluctance to talk about money is an expression of our privilege. Now, that's not everybody, but I've been in a lot of churches where the reluctance is because you don't have to worry about it. And what that does is it creates those in the community that are worrying about it, this sense of shame and guilt, that they're actually struggling with this and need to have some guidance, whereas some of us have this belief that because we have it, we don't have to talk about it. So, value all giving, though. I do believe, so one of the things, it's shaking. Okay, so one of the things we have to do is, when we collected and talked about what kind of money you gave, we also tracked how much time they gave to other people and other organizations. Last one's, change your ritual, disempower technology, use it, but don't give it power and idols over you. And these are questions for later, and we'll talk about more at breakout. Thank you.